Hari Hari. Rama, Rama, Hari, 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 Krishna, Hari, Krishna, Krishna, Hari, 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 Rama, Rama, Hari, 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 Krishna, 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 Hari, 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 Rama, Hari, Rama, Rama, Hari, 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 Krishna, 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 Hari, 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 Rama, Hari, Rama, Rama, Hari, 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 Krishna, Krishna, Hari, 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 Rama, Hari, Rama. Rama, Rama, Hari, 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 Krishna, Krishna, Hari, 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 Rama, 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 Hari, 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 Krishna, Krishna, Hari, 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 Rama, Rama, Hari, Hari, Hari. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna, Hare, 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 Krishna, Krishna, Hare, Hare, Rama, Rama, Hare, 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 Krishna, Krishna, Hare, 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 Rama, Rama, Hare, 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 Rama, Rama, Hare, 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 Rama, Rama, Hare, 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 Krishna, Krishna, Hare, 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 Rama, Rama, Hare, 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 Krishna, Krishna, Hare, 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 Rama, Rama, Hare, Hare, Hare. Rama, Rama, Hare, 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 Rama, Rama, Hare, 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 Rama, Rama, Hare, 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 Krishna, Krishna, Hare, 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 Rama, Rama, Hare, 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 Krishna, Krishna, Hare, 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 Rama. Okay, devotees, near vort yadoljan nachat chitat Prabhupada lilamrita. I have to begin reading Prabhupada lilamrita. Okay. Uvidimsa zavtra. See you tomorrow. Harasha. Jairasa Priya. Krishna Priya. Devaki Haribol. And everyone. Evasya. Okay. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare. So, devotees, you are more than welcome to stay, absolutely. But if for any reason at all you feel you prefer, or maybe you've got something else to do or whatever, you certainly can leave, and you don't need to feel embarrassed entirely as you like. Yes, it's our evening reading. Hare Krishna devotees, welcome. Nama Om Vishnupadaya Krishna Presta Bhutale Shrimati Bhakti Vedanta Swaminiti Namane Namaste Saraswati Deve Gauravani Pracharane Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Pastya Chadesh Tarne Sri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadha Shivas Adi Gaura Bhaktivinoda Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Vanchikalpatarubhyascha kripa sindubhya evacha. Patitanam pavanebhyo vaishnavebhyo namo namaha. Srila Prabhupada ki jai. All right, so we are still in San Francisco. We had a little side trip to New York last night and back. Sure, what a situation. So now it is March 26th, 1967. Where were you on March the 26th, 1967? Well, they doesn't say what day of the week, but March 1967, I was at school in New Zealand, in King's College. So much for that. Where were you? Previous lifetime. Huh? Yeah, okay, so you were around. You were at high school. Must have been. You were 14 then, probably. 13 or 14. Right, 1967. And you were also previous lifetime. Yeah. Later stages. Okay, anyway, here we go. Yes, so if you remember last night, well, the last thing that happened was that Malati Devi Dasi went to a shop called Cost Plus. They import things and sell them sort of cheap. And she found a little Lord Jagannath, which was, well, I think 3 inches. 3-inch deity of Jagannath. There were 2 other, deities, but she thought they were just kind of, I don't know, dolls or figurines or something. And she brought it back and asked Prabhupada, what is this? And Prabhupada offered pranams and explained that it's Jagannath. So then, because they're 3 inches tall, it's just too small to have as the main deities in anything but the most extremely small temple room. But their temple room was, I don't know, probably a bit bigger than this, I guess. So Prabhupada asked Shamsundar to carve. Well, he asked if anyone knew how to do wood carving, and Shamsundar had done some before. Yeah, so Prabhupada asked, carve deities. I think they're 3 feet tall, if I remember. Yeah, 3-foot high copies of Jagannath, Baladev, Subhadra, because they went back and bought more. There was a whole lot of them there. Whew. Don't ask me how. From India, from Puri, because that's really the only place they make them. From Puri, they ended up in San Francisco. Okay, on March 26th, the appearance day of Lord Caitanya, Prabhupada said that during the morning, they would stay together in the temple, read about Lord Caitanya, and hold kirtan. And in the evening they would have a ceremony for installing Lord Jagannath. Having fasted until moonrise, they would then break fast with a prasadam feast. When Srila Prabhupada entered the temple that morning, he saw the work the devotees had done. The new altar stood in the rear of the room, above where his dais had been, and his dais was now on the right side of the room against the wall. From his seat, he would be able to see the altar very easily. The altar was a simple redwood plank, 7 feet above the floor, and fixed between 2 thick redwood pillars. A canopy covered the place where the deities would stand. Below the altar hung Haridas's painting of Lord Caitanya and his associates dancing during kirtan, and behind the painting was a Madras backdrop. About 3 feet above the floor, a shelf below the painting held candlesticks and would be used for articles to be offered to the deities. Prabhupada took his seat. As usual, he led kirtan and then chanted 1 round of japa with the devotees and everybody. That's interesting, isn't it? Prabhupada, as this is a public program. Well, it's a public program. I mean, it's more for devotees, but there are others there also. And Prabhupada would get everyone to chant a round of japa. And then he had Hayagriva read aloud from the biographical sketch of Lord Caitanya from the first volume of Srimad Bhagavatam. But many devotees were sleepy, despite Hayagriva's reading loudly with force and elocution, because he was an English scholar. He had a master's. He lectured in university to some degree in English. So he was into English. But the devotees were falling asleep. So, yes, devotees falling asleep. There are many extraordinary stories. The one, well, there's a few really special ones. One was everyone had been up through the night for something, somewhere. And so, but they still had a morning program. Everyone was falling asleep. And so someone gave class and everyone fell asleep, literally, including the devotee giving class. Then another famous one ISKCON guru was giving class probably in the 80s, and one young brahmachari, young man, was fanning the devotee giving class, and the devotee fanning was falling asleep, standing up. And eventually he just collapsed in the lap of the devotee giving class and rolled off. Then another one, what happened? Well, we walked into the prasadam room one time, and one devotee who had been up all night for a few nights had fallen asleep while taking prasadam. That in itself is something special. But the devotee was sitting cross-legged and had just fallen asleep with face in the prasadam. Then another one I remember, I was there. One devotee during japa was sitting at the back. Here's the altar, sitting right at the back, leaning back against the back wall. And everyone's chanting, devotees falling asleep. And then Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, falling asleep. And then, well, in those days we didn't have deity greeting. That only started after or Guru Puja or anything. We just went straight from japa into class. Those were the early days. And so the class started, and the devotee sitting at the back, that devotee is now just completely asleep. And the class is going on, for 5 minutes or something. Suddenly the devotee at the back jumped up. Hare Krishna, Krishna. And we had this one devotee. He had a thing, that we're not these bodies, so we should not succumb to the natures of these bodies. We must resist. So therefore he tried to live without sleeping. But as soon as he'd sit down, any time, anywhere, within seconds he would have fallen asleep. So we would go out, this is in London, we would go out to different suburbs to distribute books on the tube, the underground railway. And this devotee, he would go on his own, and he'd sit down on the train and immediately fall asleep. And the train would go on for, like half an hour or something to the end of the line. And then they stop, and that's it. And the conductors come through, so they'd wake him up, and he'd get off the train, and he'd get on the train going back the other way. So there are trains every 5 minutes or 10 minutes. And so he'd sit down. As soon as he'd sit down, and he'd go right through from the end of the line through the center of the city to the other end. And eventually he'd just get out somewhere because he was meant to go to a particular place, but he'd sleep through it. Anyway, we diverge. Right. So, devotees were sleepy. Although Prabhupada was listening attentively and wanted the others to sit with him and hear about Lord Caitanya, when he saw that so many were dozing, he stopped the reading and held another kirtan. Then he chanted japa with them for about 15 minutes. All right, he said. Prabhupada said, we will read again. Who will read? Lilavati's hand flew up urgently. All right. He had her sit near his dais, and someone placed a microphone before her. Lilavati's reading presented a contrast to the deep tones of Hayagriva. But she was another scholarly voice. Her careful pronunciation of the Sanskrit words and phrases was pleasing to Srila Prabhupada. And he several times commented, oh, very nice. Lilavati was thrilled and read on intensely, determined to keep everyone awake. Well, I may have mentioned this before. Some of you may have heard, or all of you, or some of you, that there was a stage in our temple in London, central London, where the temple commander, who's like the sort of the foreman, getting all the work done, devotees, would really fall asleep quite a bit, and he would use a water pistol. Seriously. And during japa, he'd have one hand in his bead bag, the other hand the water pistol. These were the good old days. Sheer unbelievable. Okay. That evening, devotees and hippie guests filled the room to capacity. Prabhupada was present, and the mood was reverential and festive. It was a special event. The just-finished deities sat on the altar, and everyone was glancing at them as they stood on their redwood shelf beneath a yellow canopy, their features illumined by spotlights. The deities wore no clothes or ornaments, but were freshly painted in bright black, red, white, green, yellow, and blue. They were smiling. Srila Prabhupada was also glancing at them, looking up to their high altar. I remember once we had a center, preaching center, in Joburg, in Yeovil, just at the bottom of Yeovil, near Saratoga Avenue, if you know where that is. But anyway, there, preaching center. And one day it was the VIT students' rag day. And I don't know if you're familiar with the rag days, and the students go out, loads of students, and there's a sort of a parade with sort of float type things, and the students run around collecting money. Two things: collecting money, drinking beer. And we had a truck with a giant Lord Jagannath. I don't know if he would be quite up to the ceiling, but he was, 2/3 to 3/4 of the way up to the ceiling, and as wide as the back of a truck. Means like 8 feet wide. Jagannath. Wow. And the students, and we were on the truck having kirtan, and the students got into it completely. And every now and then, all these students would come running. They're running around collecting money, drinking beer, collecting money, drinking beer. And every now and, not just every now and then, regularly, they would come back in front of Jagannath. Jagannath, it was an open back truck, and Jagannath was facing backwards with his back to, we were sitting in here, facing that way. Jagannath's leaning against the back, facing back. And they'd come running back, the students, and they'd shout out, "Juggy, Juggy!" And off they'd go again, collecting money, drinking beer, and coming back, "Juggy, Juggy," and waving. They were smiling. Srila Prabhupada was also glancing at them, looking up to their high altar. The altar is like 6 feet, say 2 meters high. It's kind of bit extraordinary, really. Unless you got a really big temple room. So, Prabhupada lectured about the 4 social and 4 spiritual orders of life described in the Vedic literatures. According to one's quality and work, he said, each person has a certain occupational duty. But the ultimate goal of that duty, he explained, is to satisfy the Supreme Lord. It doesn't matter if one is low-born or poor. Material qualification has nothing to do with spiritual evolution, he said. Spiritual evolution is that with your talent, with your capacity, with your work, you have to satisfy the Supreme Lord. Prabhupada gave the example of Sridhar, an impoverished devotee of Lord Chaitanya's, who earned the equivalent of less than 5 cents a day, yet offered half his earnings in worship of the Ganges. If one were rich, however, one should still give half his wealth to the service of the Lord. You know, Sridhar, of course there's a lot we can say about Sridhar, but Lord Chaitanya would sort of transcendentally harass him when Lord Chaitanya was a young boy at school. And Lord Chaitanya, for example, would come and say to him, listen, I know you are making so much money selling your bananas and banana leaves and banana flowers and different parts of the banana. You're making so much money, I heard. You must be making so much, because I heard you give half of what you make for the worship of the Ganges. So we can hardly imagine how much you're making. Lord Chaitanya would give him a hard time. And then Lord Chaitanya said, actually, you should give me all the money because the Ganges is coming from me. And Sridhar would think, because he didn't know who's Lord Chaitanya, he would think, this boy is terrible. Prabhupada cited Rupa Goswami, who had given 50% of his wealth for Krishna consciousness, given 25% for his family, and saved 25% for emergencies. Suddenly, Prabhupada began speaking about the money his disciples in New York had lost. Wow. And this is in front of everyone, this packed temple full of hippies. Yes, okay, so Prabhupada said, and 25% for himself, so that in times of emergency, because as soon as money has gone out of my hand, I have no control. We have recently lost $6,000, not here, in our New York. So as soon as the check is out of hand, now it is gone. It is gone. Prabhupada gestured to indicate money flying like a bird out of his hand. At this reference to the troubling, entangling affair with Mr. Price and the foolish boys and their hard-earned money gone, Prabhupada paused for a moment. Because the boys, they gave, Brahmananda gave 5,000, you remember that was last night. But they had already given 1,000 just for sort of miscellaneous expenses of Mr. Price. So it's just ridiculous. Yeah, completely. So then he continued with the lecture. Paying attention to Bhagavan, the Supreme Person, is practical, Srila Prabhupada said. Here is Krishna. Krishna's form is there. Krishna's color is there. Krishna's helmet is there. Krishna's advice is there. Krishna's instruction is there. Krishna's sound is there. Everything Krishna, everything Krishna. There is no difficulty. Actually, that money, the boys had collected themselves. It wasn't money that Prabhupada had collected, because he would collect. He sold his books, Bhagavatam sets, and he, at the programs, people would come and donate money. And people donated. Allen Ginsberg gave $200. And like that, different people gave money. But this was money which the boys had collected themselves. So Prabhupada continued, but if you turn your attention to the impersonal and to the supersoul in the heart, as the yogis do, then it is very difficult. It is very difficult. You cannot fix your attention to the impersonal. In the Bhagavad Gita it is said that kleshadi katarastesham avyakta sakta chetasam. Those who are attached to the impersonal feature of the absolute truth, their business is very troublesome. It is not like chanting, dancing, and eating. This is very nice, but that is very troublesome. And even if you speculate on the impersonal, the result that is achieved by working hard for many, many years is that you will have to also eventually come to Krishna. Srila Prabhupada continued describing Krishna as the Supreme Personality of Godhead, citing evidence from scriptures like Bhagavad Gita and Brahma Samhita. The first step in spiritual life, he explained, was to hear from Krishna himself. But Prabhupada warned that if one heard the class and then went outside and forgot, he could not improve. Whatever you are hearing, you should say to others, Prabhupada said. And he gave the example of how disciples were writing in Back to Godhead what they had heard from their spiritual master. And to speak or write what one has heard, a person has to be thoughtful. You are hearing about Krishna, and you have to think. Then you have to speak. Otherwise it will not work. So, Shrotavya kirtitavyascha, jaya pujascha, and you should worship. Yeah, this is a very important part of Krishna consciousness, actually. We have to read the books, hear the classes, and that's all part of the program. Well, these are foundational parts of the program. But then, if you don't repeat it, or describe it, talk about it, or talk it, then Prabhupada says it will not work. There's a saying that if you don't repeat the knowledge, it'll tend to sort of fester within you and you'll become confused. So there has to be a cycle of receiving, giving, receiving, giving, receiving, giving. It's a cycle to keep the whole process in the broadest sense of the whole process of Krishna consciousness, to keep it alive and well. Yeah. And you should worship. Therefore, you require this deity for worshipping. We have to think of, we have to speak, we have to hear, we have to worship, pujascha. And should we do this occasionally? No, nityada, regularly, regularly. This is the process. So anyone who adopts this process, he can understand the absolute truth. This is the clear declaration of the Srimad Bhagavatam. Thank you very much. Any question? A young boy raised his hand and began earnestly. Well, you mentioned about how we should follow the supreme law, how we should be like what your spirit tells you, or what your supreme, whatever it tells you. I mean, whatever it tells you. I mean, if you meditate a lot, you feel you should do something. Prabhupada, it is not something. It must be actual fact. Boy, yeah, I mean like Prabhupada, so there is no question of something. Boy, well, I see, Prabhupada, something is vague. You must speak. What is that something? Boy, well, let's say be Prabhupada, that you cannot express. That means you have no idea. So we have to learn. This is the process. I'm speaking of the process. If you want to have knowledge of the absolute truth, the first thing is faith. Then you must be thoughtful. Then you must be devoted. And you must hear from authentic sources. These are the different methods. And when you come to the ultimate knowledge, from Brahman platform to Paramatma platform, then to the Supreme Absolute Personality of Godhead, then your duty shall be to satisfy the Supreme Personality of Godhead. That is the perfection of your active life. These are the processes, and it is concluded that everyone, never mind what he is, his duty is to satisfy the Supreme Personality of Godhead. And how can we satisfy? We have to hear about him. We have to speak about him. We have to think about him. We have to worship him. And that is regularly. This will help you. But if you have no worship, if you have no thought, if you have no hearing, if you have no speaking, and you're simply thinking of something, 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 that something, something is not God. Boy, I mean, well, you know, I'm so young, I didn't know what I meant. I don't know what, Prabhupada, don't know that I'm speaking. That you have to know by these processes. We are all don't knows. So we have to know. This is the process. Young woman, since we don't yet understand the supreme law because we are young and just new to this, then how can we speak about it? Prabhupada. Therefore you have to hear. The first thing is shrotavya. You have to hear. Unless you hear, how can you speak? We're therefore giving you facility to hear. You hear, and then you can speak. Then you can think. We're giving all facility to hear, to speak, to think, to worship. This is the society's work. Unless you hear, how can you speak? The first task is given, shrotavya. Then kirtitavyascha, dhyaya pujascha nityada. These are the processes. You have to hear. And hearing, you have to repeat, chant. And then you have to think. You have to worship. These are the processes. Upendra. Swamiji, so we have to hear, I understand. But do we speak, or do we first listen for a long time and then speak? Prabhupada, no. Why a long time? Suppose you hear 2 lines. You repeat that 2 lines. And aside from everything else, you hear Hare Krishna. So you can chant Hare Krishna. What is the difficulty there? Shrotavya kirtitavyascha. You have to hear and chant. So if you cannot remember all the topics which we're speaking from the Bhagavad Gita or Srimad Bhagavatam, you can at least remember this, Hare Krishna. Therefore it is the easiest process. You hear Hare Krishna and chant Hare Krishna. The other things will come automatically. Now, this is possible for everyone. Even the child can repeat Hare Krishna. What is the difficulty? You hear Hare Krishna and chant Hare Krishna. We're not giving you very difficult or troublesome task. Then everything will follow. We're giving you everything. But if you feel in the beginning it is difficult, then you can do this. This is very nice. Chant Hare Krishna. You are doing that actually. Hearing and chanting. This process will help you. It is the basic principle of advancement in spiritual life. Without hearing, we shall simply concoct, waste our time, and mislead people. We have to hear from the authoritative sources. So, let's see. Hare Krishna. We'll carry on tomorrow. The plan is till just after Gorpanima, which is March 18th, so sort of end of March, put it that way. 3 months, slightly more, if that's okay. We don't want to harass you.
And then after that?
Back home to Santa. Those are the only places. Yeah, that's where we go. Well, you know, if let's say when things ease off with the COVID, then, well, you were there, I think, we'll start doing some programs outside.